Okay, good morning, everyone. To be respectful of everybody's time, we're going to get started. Thank you guys so much for logging in with us this morning. I know compliance is a hot topic right now, and we're here with Task. They're one of our partners. They are our compliance experts, and we're going to be having Elliot, our regional sales director at Task, and he's got a lot of valuable information for you guys. If we could just go through some important reminders. And if you could also just go ahead and mute your phones. That helps us with the feedback and anything that's happening in the background. And Elliot, if you could go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so if you could put your phone on mute. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat box. We're going to answer them at the end. And we'll answer every question, and if it's a too specific question, of course, we'll follow up with you. And then also just to let you know, we will be sending you a follow-up email to recap what we discussed today and just to give you some extra valuable information about compliance. So Elliot, I'm going to turn it over to you. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Cinco de Mayo. I hope throughout our presentation we don't give you too much incentive to go out and drink tonight, but it is, as Veronica mentioned, a very important topic. The Affordable Care Act has definitely impacted this area of legislation, and employers need to be aware of their responsibilities as well as market changes and audit activity. So we're going to review all those things today, tell you your responsibility, and let's just get started. So first, this is task confidentiality. I think it's just so our attorneys can argue back and forth if sharing important, sensitive information and so forth. Long and short of that is if you share this with anyone outside of this meeting, we're going to have to track you down and stick Dog the Bounty Hunter on you and put you in jail or something. So that's our confidentiality agreement. All companies have them. There it is. So first, I want to give you a little background. Usually there's a trigger for any sort of government regulation. So the origin of ERISA actually came about from Studebaker. Studebaker, as many of you know, is a car company. There was a key point in the car company's lifespan that actually triggered ERISA. So what happened is December 23rd, 1963, the company actually announced that their plant was closing. They had a ton of employees, over 15,000 actually. So let's see what happened as a result of that. Of those, approximately 11,000 of those 15,000 employees had pension plans. Okay? Immediately, 5,000 of those workers were dismissed. Here are some of those statistics. 4,100 reached the age of 60 and actually received a full pension. 4,000 of those received 15% of what they had contributed, with an average of 43 years of service. 2,900 received nothing at all. And then, of course, some with a ton of service in place missed the full pension just because of the age at which they retired. And then just days before December holidays, 3,000 were laid off with no pension. So prior to this actual event, there was no governmental regulation for anything about, retirement plans, pension plans, or so forth. So what happened is ERISA came about as a result of that Studebaker activity and occurrence. What you may not know about that is that ERISA was originally written for pensions. So if you have a 401k plan in place, it is highly likely that whomever is the administrator for that 401k plan has all their ducks in a row with respect to ERISA. Because these same requirements that I'm about to discuss with you, they not only apply to health and welfare benefits, but they apply to pension plans as well. So just like Studebaker was a trigger for the pension plan side of things for ERISA to come into play, the Affordable Care Act was the trigger for increased enforcement on the health and welfare benefit side. So who's governing all this? Well, it's a subdivision of ERISA, and that is the EBSA, Employee Benefits Security Administration. I like to point out the mission statement here at the bottom. The mission of the Employee Benefits Security Administration is to assure the security of the retirement, health, and other workplace-related benefits of America's workers and their families. The key part of this whole mission statement I want you to take away is the vigorously enforcing the law. We know, based on our market analysis, that 90 to 95% of employers are out of compliance with respect to ERISA. So as you can imagine, one of the very first questions we get is why? Why are employers out of compliance? First, there's an overall lack of awareness in the marketplace. Most employers just don't know about their ERISA responsibilities. They've heard of a magic 100 employee number, at that number you are required to do some reporting with the government for 5,500s on the health and welfare benefits side. But if you are an employer and you have just 2 employees and you offer a health and welfare benefit plan, ERISA applies to you. The second main reason why employers are out of compliance is because they believe that the documents supplied from the insurance carrier are all that is necessary. That's all their responsibilities. They hand out the many forms that the insurance carrier gives you, and they don't do anything in additional to that. And then, of course, there's confusion due to the complexity of the regulations. Anyone who's ever sat down and tried to read some of this stuff with the aforementioned and hereuntos and double negatives, it's definitely very difficult to understand and figure out just what you should be doing on your end as a responsible employer. And then lastly, prior limited enforcement. This is key to why we're having this conversation today. So the Employee Benefits Security Administration has to make their annual budget public. And just like you as an employer, if you are going to hire a new employee, you have to justify that employee's hiring. They have to, of course, give you a better return on investment than you're putting out. Same thing holds true for the Employee Benefits Security Administration budget. So let's tell you how this has changed since the Affordable Care Act. Their budget has been averaging about $175 million a year in increases. They have hired 1,000 full-time equivalents on average, again, since March 23rd, 2010. So we fast forward 6 years. That's 6,000 additional auditors. To tell you how that's affected your local enforcement office, I know we may have some people in Virginia on the line, but for Florida, there is an office in Plantation. That office, it was, prior to March 23rd, 2010, responsible for Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and the southern half of Alabama. After the Employee Benefits Security Administration, with all these hirings, they have actually reduced that territory all the way down to Florida. In addition to that, that office went from 4 investigators, just 4, and you can imagine with 4 investigators, they have to focus on, complaints first, larger employers, and then there's very limited time after that to get to just the random audits. But today, that same office that previously had 4 investigators has 60. So you can imagine with increased resources, they have much more audit activity as a result. So what is ERISA? What is all this stuff? So ERISA, the topic itself, what we're going to define for you today is we're going to define what ERISA is. We're going to tell you who's subject to it. We're going to tell you what this health and welfare benefit plans are. We're going to tell you benefits subject to ERISA, and we're going to make some arguments there where there's some gray areas, okay? If you have any safe harbors, and there's very few of them, we're going to point those out to you as well. And I'm going to help you understand basic ERISA rules and all the disclosures and reporting that comes along with it. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about how healthcare reform has further impacted the additional requirements. We've all seen, at least in the insurance industry, the picture that circulated the internet, right? The first time the Affordable Care Act was written, it was about a phone book in depth. Now it's over 7 feet tall. So that increase in the amount of documentation and requirements under the Affordable Care Act has spilled over to other areas of law. So as I said before, the law itself is the Employee Retirement Income and Income Security Act of 1974. The Studebaker occurrence did occur in 63. The violation was noted in 66, and like anything with the government, it took a little bit of time. So 8 years passed, and then the law was finally, in its current version, put into place in 1974. Title I is part of the U.S. labor laws. It governs the structure of employee benefits plans, and it requires a couple of things. One is detailed disclosures. We're going to focus on this because that applies to all employers, all private sector employers, regardless of size. So this is one of those common misconceptions amongst employers about not understanding their responsibilities. If you have just 2 or more employees and you have a health and welfare benefit plan, you are subject to ERISA. In addition, if you cross that magic number 100+ participant threshold, you are required an additional responsibility to report aspects of your plan to the government and create a summary version to give to employees. There's strict responsibilities as far as how you handle the funds that you're given. That's your fiduciary code of conduct. And of course, to ensure that you do this, how does the government force an employer to act? Well, most often they're going to do it by giving you some sort of consequence or liability. So we'll talk about those fines as well and how they could potentially impact you. So I wanted to actually touch base on those from the outset. And I've picked, this is all public information again, I've picked 4 key non-compliance violations. The first one, you'll notice from Airport Hospitality back in 2010, they were fined $86,500 for failure to file a complete and accurate Form 5500. This is key. Most employers get in trouble for not filing at all whatsoever. The reason why I pulled this one out and brought it to your attention is this employer was actually filing 5500s. What happened to them is upon audit, their 5500 was reviewed and pushed back. They were told that their previous 8 years filings were incorrect and inaccurate, and as a result, they were fined the fine you see on your screen, $86,500. So that was an employer that was trying to do their due diligence and complete their responsibilities under ERISA and still were fined. The next 3 are involving disclosures to participants. So you remember how I said if you had 2 or more employees, you had to give employees a certain document either upon their enrollment in the plan or upon their request of the document? These 3 employers were fined these amounts of money, and the funny part about it is, or not so funny depending upon your point of view, is that those monetary results were not awarded to the Department of Labor. These are actually given to the participant as a fine. The third bullet point that you'll see there, the reason I pulled that one out is that's Bank of America. Bank of America is a huge bank. We all know they're on our corners everywhere. And I'm positive that they have both an ERISA attorney on staff and probably a benefits committee. And they were fined as a result of an ERISA violation. So I always say, you know, if Bank of America, with all the expansive resources they have, if they were fined, what chance does a small employer have? So the Department of Labor is flooding the market with, you know, we live in an electronic and digital age, so they're doing their best to get this information out to employees, individuals, and so forth. As you can imagine, there's been considerable resources put into not only the Affordable Care Act and healthcare legislation in general, but also smaller legislation that comes across that the Department of Labor asks that you convey in the form of model notices. And we'll touch base on what those are as well. So here is the 7 parts to ERISA. You're going to notice that we're skipping parts 2 and 3, And the reason being is because, as I mentioned previously, there's two sides to ERISA. There's the left side, which is the pension side, and then there's the right side, which is the health and welfare benefits. So all we're going to be talking about today is going to be the health and welfare benefits side. So parts 2 and 3 deal specifically with pension plans, so we're going to skip those altogether. Okay? So first we have to define what a welfare benefit plan is. First, you're going to know the most obvious versions of this, the health, dental, and vision. Where I would bring your eyes is down to the bottom. Most employers are not aware that a wellness or employee assistance program is subject to ERISA. Some are not aware that voluntary benefits offered on a pre-tax basis under a Section 125, in our opinion, tax's opinion, and I'll defend that in a moment, is subject to ERISA as well. The others, a little bit more obvious. Your FSAs, your HRAs, your accidental death and dismemberment. I think if we were to quiz the audience beforehand, most of you would identify those as welfare benefit plans. So voluntary insurance. The reason I keep this in this presentation is not only to review why TASC believes that voluntary insurance should be subject to ERISA, but it also helps you identify how the government determines if a plan is subject to ERISA. So the only 4 tests are basically need to be met to see if an employer established or maintains the plan. So the employer cannot make any contributions to the plan. The participation must be totally voluntary. The sole function of the employer is, without endorsing the plan, that's a key component, permitting the insurer to publicize the program and collecting premiums through payroll deductions, and the employer, of course, receives no commissions or reasonable compensation. Most voluntary programs, in our opinion, can easily satisfy requirements 1, 2, and 4. So let's show you how that works. Factors that impact the likelihood that an employer is endorsing a ERISA plan. First, these components down here. Do you permit employees to receive a group discount on individual policies? Do they receive group rates as a result of offering it through your program? Who serves as the policyholder? Do you permit the insurer to advertise that policy and distribute information to employees? Probably highly likely, right? Do you deduct and remit those premiums? So these are less likely, but they're still components that can be argued for ERISA. The next phase is, do you review and approve the literature that's distributed to your employees? Probably, right? Do you help prepare their claims from your HR department? Do you allow their name to be used on your marketing materials? Do they distribute their certificates, enrollment forms, and waiver cards? And do these enrollment meetings take place during business hours? This is going to be, again, we're getting more and more subject to ERISA if any of these components come into play. And then this is where I believe that most employers get caught. Do you choose the insurer? Do you endorse the plan and permit the employer's logo to use by the insurer? Do you suggest or negotiate policy design terms and rates, or do you run the actual enrollment meetings on behalf of the insurer? And then lastly, clear cut, responsible for ERISA. Do you pay the premium or reduce employees pay for paid premium? Or do you offer a benefits program under a flexible benefit or cafeteria plan? So you can see unlikely at the bottom and then highly likely at the top. So again, this is just an argument made for the voluntary benefit side of things. And the reason being is because this is a major gray area for most employers, and you're going to receive different guidance based on who you ask. It's important that, we run through this checklist to determine if those sorts of plans are subject to ERISA and have all our ducks in a row as a result. Up at the top in the orange box, I'll give you an Aflac example. Aflac's a very popular voluntary benefits program, and when they first came out, they had one plan. It was a cancer plan. Now, any of you employers that have an Aflac plan in place, you know that they probably have 30 to 40 plans that they can offer to employees. So it's highly likely that you went to them and say, hey, I don't want to confuse them with 30 different plans. Let's just go with these 3 plans, right? And then I'll agree to post a poster and let the employees know that you'll be coming by on Tuesday. In our opinion, you've done two things. You've designed the plan at that point, right? And then the second thing is you've endorsed it by advertising it to employees. So who's subject to ERISA? For the most part, it's going to be everybody. The pop quiz always is, who would be exempt? And the first one to come to mind is the government, and you'd be absolutely correct. The government is not subjecting themselves to ERISA. They are not responsible to adhering to the same things. The only other two entities that would not be subject to ERISA we're going to cover in the next slide. But again, there's 9 factors, and they're listed in this paragraph here, and I'm sure Veronica is going to get out this presentation to everybody. If you can satisfy all 9, then you would not be subject to ERISA because you would be considered a governmental entity under Section 501A. It's highly likely that you're not, guys. I do want to touch base here on the nonprofit organizations. Sometimes there's confusion because of the taxation exemption. There's the thought that you would not be subject to ERISA as well. You still are, okay? So just because you have that tax advantage does not mean you are exempt from ERISA. 2 other entities besides the government that have statutory and regulatory exemption would be government entities and church entities as well. Church plans need to be careful because if you're a church plan and you have solely church employees, then you're exempt. But if you have an affiliated school and those teachers and so forth work for the school, then that school would be subject to ERISA, but not the church itself. Lastly would be Native American organizations and so forth, but again, those are significant outliers. For the purposes of our conversation, if you're a church or a governmental entity, then you're exempt. Pretty much everybody else is responsible for ERISA. So what are some of those key ERISA requirements? 1, a plan document must exist for each plan. So what that plan document is it's basically added in addition to summary of benefits and coverage or insurance carrier related documents. There's very specific terms that must be followed. You'll see there's dates that you have to get these materials to the participants clearly defined. They go all the way down to, the government actually regulates this all the way down to the size of font that you're able to use. And the method of delivery is also very specific as well. So summary plan description is exactly what you would think it is. It's an abbreviated version of that plan document. In the insurance industry, we like to use acronyms. As a term, summary plan description is very difficult because there's so many things in the insurance world that refers to themselves as summary plan description. So it's easily confused for an employer. So as an example, if I were to come into your office and ask you for an STD, it's highly likely that I'd be given the Section 125 premium only plan document or the summary of benefits and coverage that the insurance carrier provides. The one thing I want you to know is there's only 3 ways that you're going to have this stuff. And that's if you've hired an ERISA attorney, if you've hired a company such as Task to prepare it for you, or if you've done it yourself. The insurance carrier does not provide this to you, okay? Summary of material modification is a little 1-pager where if you make a small change to the plan in the middle of the year, let's say you drop your dental plan because the exposure is just not there or the last participant left or what have you, the little 1-pager allows you to communicate that without rewriting the entire summary plan description. Often the government also makes changes on their ends which would trigger the employer to have to send out a summary of material modification. Copies of these documents, I showed you about the signs previously, must be made available to both participants and beneficiaries upon written request. And then, of course, if you're over that magic threshold, you would have to report and create a summary of that report to the government. So let's talk about what each of those documents are. The plan document is essentially a written document that's going to explain such things as who's the plan sponsor, who's the plan fiduciary. That fiduciary is whoever's handling funds prior to them being delivered to the carrier. You probably pull out the employee portion of their funds on a per payroll basis and pay the carrier on a monthly basis. So where do those funds go in the interim? Who's handling them? Also describing each of the different benefits of the plan itself. A ERISA plan can exist without a document. Of course, you'll be out of compliance, but a ERISA plan can exist. So as an example, if you're over 100 employees, we've already talked that you have a responsibility to file a 5500. But that 5500 is based upon your ERISA plan year. Without an ERISA plan document, you don't have a plan year. So then how does the government determine that your plan does exist? Basically, they just put you on a calendar year. And whatever your filing responsibilities were, they placed them as if you were supposed to file them on January 1 in the absence of the written document. So that's why it's very important that you do have an ERISA plan even if you don't have the document in place. So the wrap document is going to be the most common way that the employer addresses this. Rather than write a plan document for each and every health and welfare benefit plan they have, like health, dental, vision, that's 3 different plan documents, what an employer most often chooses to do is write a wrap document, which encompasses all of their benefits and references each of those individual plans internally within the document. I mentioned some of these previously. It names who that plan sponsor is, who's the fiduciary, plan year and plan number, okay? If you have a premium-only plan in place, you're probably familiar with the number 501, 502. They all start with 500, okay? Designation of how many plans maintained by the plan sponsors. That's just that reference of all the others. There's going to be eligibility and entitlement information in there, as well as FMLA reference, as well as COBRA. Think about it this way. ERISA is at the top of the level, and some of those other things that you're probably more familiar with, like FMLA and COBRA, are actually underneath ERISA law. So fun fact. So who must be provided an SPD? Everyone, essentially. It must be furnished to participants covered in an ERISA welfare plan. You're not required to send it out to beneficiaries unless they request it. COBRA qualified beneficiary underneath ERISA, that is a member of your plan, so they would also be entitled to receive a plan document. So when and how do you furnish these documents? So generally, the participant has to receive it within 90 days of them first becoming covered underneath your plan. If you establish a new plan, then you have 120 days to provide that document to that participant. Updated SPDs must be furnished to all covered participants every 5 years. So this one, most employers are not going to run into this problem. What that is meaning is if you don't make any changes to your benefit plans for the course of 5 years, then you would still have to send the participants a new SPD. Most employers make at least one change every year. They're going to switch from carrier, change deductibles and so forth, change plans in the best interest of their plan itself. So usually you're not having to be concerned about that. But that's just the law you have to be aware of. So lastly, must be furnished in a way reasonably calculated to ensure actual receipt of the material using a method likely to result in full distribution. That is the frustration with most government items. That is very vague, right? So if I put 2 people on each side of the table and I said, let's argue that, what would you feel is reasonably calculated to ensure receipt likely to result in full distribution? If I have 2 different parties that, I would likely get 2 different answers. Tax point of perspective is a very conservative one. We practice the CYA method, right? So when you deliver these, you want to make sure that both you have proof that the employee received it, and you have to follow a specific manner in which they can receive it, right? You can't just, mail it to everybody or post it up on a company intranet. They're very specific in how you have to deliver it. We'll talk about those details a little later. So what kind of document satisfies the SPD requirement? Of course, the summary plan description, right? Summary of material modification. The summary of material modification, we touched about it briefly before. It's when you make an individual change to the plan itself or when the government comes in and makes a change. Most often in the past several years, that's been the result of model notices. We'll talk about those as well. That one, you have a little bit more time, actually a considerable amount of time. You have 210 days after the plan year in which the modification changed to deliver that summary of material modification. As I described to you earlier, a lot of times this is brought about by government change. So unless you have someone in your HR department monitoring DOL sites or attending DOL meetings, it's highly likely that you've missed some of these model notices. Just to give you an example, there's 16 of them currently. DINA Title I, DINA Title II, Mental Health Parity Act, Michelle's Law, to name a few. So if those don't ring bells, you are missing some model notices that should be getting in the hands of employees. So how? Again, I mentioned that approved methods are first, second, or third class mail certified, right? Special insert into a company or union publication, in-hand delivery. If you do want to deliver this to them electronically, you can do so, but again, in interpreting that previously vague statement, we've said, listen, we want to make sure that they receive it, so if you send it electronically, if they have a company email and they have a computer to do their everyday function of the job, then it's perfectly okay for you to send these documents out electronically. But if they don't have access to those things, then likely a paper version would become necessary. You can still send it, if they don't have a work email, to their personal email, but you would be required to get them to sign off that that's okay. The reason I'm mentioning this is because most employers, on a cost basis, are going to want to do this electronically. These are 16 to 20-page documents, sometimes longer depending upon the complexity of your plan. So those would be required, okay? So I'm going to speed it up for you guys a little bit. I'm getting a whistle from Veronica that we're running short on time. So you have to provide them on written request. I made you aware of that, and I told you about the fines that happened previously. How did the fines occur? Essentially, the liability that's there is after 30 days. On the 31st day, the penalty is $110 per day, up to $200 for every day that you fail to respond to that ERISA SPD. So what likely happens, and probably what happens to Bank of America, is a participant shoots you an email, asks you for their ERISA SPD. You provide them with probably the insurance-related documents that you believe to be compliant. They stay quiet, and then 5 years later when they terminate from employee, you being an employee with you, they raise that red flag and say you never delivered the ERISA SPD. So the 5500 filing, again, that applies to 100 or more participants in any given one health and welfare benefit plan. You need to report details of that plan to the government itself. It works very similar on actually exactly the same on the pension plan side, with one major difference in that pension plans need to file 5500 regardless of size. Health and welfare benefit plans become subject to the 5500 filing when they have 100 or more participants on the first day of the plan year. So the penalties there are quite substantial. For every day you fail to file the 5500, it's $1,100. And the penalties are cumulative, but there is a voluntary filer correction program. So if this is alarming you right now, there is a program set up where you can kind of turn yourself into the government and say, hey, I did not know I had this responsibility. Here's my penalty. But again, the penalty is substantially less than that $1,100 a day fine if they were to audit you prior to you turning yourself in. Exemption from 5500 plans, again, if you're underneath that 100 threshold, it's available to small unfunded plans or combinations of plans with general assets and insurance. Again, these exemptions are few and far between. You would need an extremely special circumstance for this to apply. If you have 100 or more participants in a health and welfare benefit plan, this is your responsibility. So this is a key component of the Department of Labor regs. I mention it just to show you some of the ability within the law itself. If anyone wants to go look at this specific DOL reg 2520.104-20, it is actually speaking to refunds. So we all know that prior to the Affordable Care Act, no one ever received a refund. But with the advent of the Affordable Care Act, the medical loss ratio put into play that if 85 cents of every dollar is not spent on an employee's actual care, then those differences need to be refunded to both the plans and participants. The reason why that's important is because they didn't know that component all the way back in 1974, right? They didn't know that. But what they did put into place is if that your plan refunds your employees in any way, and you don't have a specific plan in how you're going to give those monies back to the participants, or you fail to refund those monies back to the participants, you lose your small plan exemption. Long and short of that is if you don't have a written plan document in place, you potentially could be subject to filing a 5500 moving forward, regardless of size. I don't know if they're ever going to do it, but it's an important part to show you that they can. So healthcare reform's impact on all of this, the ERISA Summary of Benefits and Coverage, the SBC, again, in insurance we like to use these acronyms. It is not the Summary Plan Description, it is the SBC. This is, again, regulated under ERISA, and my attempt is to show you that, you know, it's very convoluted. You're probably picking up bits and pieces and doing parts of this, but it's very difficult to get them all in a whole without someone that specializes in it. So, as I said, you're probably providing those participants with your summary of benefits and coverage, right, because it's provided by the insurance carrier, but you're not doing the ERISA STD requirements on the back end. One of the big components, and I'll skip forward a little bit, was that notice of exchange. So we all remember that notice of exchange. It got a lot of hype when it initially came out roughly in October, right? So this was that notice of exchange. I'm going to pull it up for you to show you what it looks like. If you remember that, that's this. This is one of 16, again, model notices that should go out to new hires, employees that enroll in your benefits plan. You'll see this red box at the bottom, and I want to definitely highlight it. So let's blow it up for you. For more information about your coverage offered by your employer, please check your summary plan description. So this is actually the Department of Labor instructing employees to ask for that ERISA STD. And what they've done is not only have they added the auditors, but they've also created a Department of Labor app, right? So there's an app for participants to request the documents or inquire about their plans. The problem is the very first question on that questionnaire is, who's your employer? And again, it will likely result in an audit. 3 different ways that you will get audited. One, there's an ESAS program, which is a digital platform for filing 5500s. I mentioned 401k plans are subject to 5500 filings regardless of your size. So if you have a 401k plan in place and you have not filed a health and welfare 5500 before, you are at high risk of audit, because the auditor can easily assume that because you have a 401k plan, you have a health and welfare benefit plan, so they're going to inquire as to the details of your plan. Yeah. The other thing is random. So if you randomly get chosen, and then lastly, it happens quite frequently with employee complaints.
And I just received a fax from Johnson & Johnson.
Please remember to mute your phone so that we don't get any feedback in the background. Thank you.
Veronica, before I touch base on task solution, I wanted to stop and make an opportunity for questions to be addressed.
Oh, okay. Well, I've just got a few that have come in through the chat box. Nicole asks, how does a plan obtain a plan number?
The plan number is actually defined, you define as the employer. It's kind of arbitrary. You define the plan number. So typically it's going to be, they start at 500, so you're going to put a plan into place at 501, right? Likely if you did not know about your ERISA responsibilities, Your premium-only plan or your pre-tax document likely has the number 501. That's kind of funny because the plan typically comes before the deduction, right? So typically the 125 should be plan 502 with your standard health and welfare plan as 501. But in direct answer to the question, it's arbitrary, and it starts with after 500. So typically it would be 501, 502, 503, and so forth.
Okay, and Lori asks, what is the duty or level of liability on the part of the carriers? For example, should the employer expect that documents and SPDs be considered accurate and correct, thereby placing onus on the carrier?
The carrier doesn't have responsibility here, and the reason being is because how the carriers are regulated. As an example, we had an audit that we were handling in Florida, and there was a challenge that we presented to Florida Blue, who is the insurance carrier. And they responded saying, listen, this is not our responsibility. We've done our research. We've discovered that this would be an $11 million annual liability for us. And so as a result, we're not going to make those changes. And again, insurance carriers are regulated on a state level. ERISA is a national law. So there's a lot of that, what they're doing, such as that summary of benefits and coverage. That's underneath ERISA, and it's supplied for you. I'd say about 60% of the job is done by the insurance carriers, but 40% falls back on the employer. And I'll give you an example as to why. Usually a health and welfare benefit plan has multiple components, right? You have a health plan from maybe Florida Blue, you have a dental from Guardian, and you have iMed from Vision, right? So you as the employer have to, in this document, tell employees that you have those three plans, what the contract years are for them, and again, who the plan sponsor, plan fiduciary, plan numbers, and everything associated with those, right? Where would Florida Blue know that you had Guardian Dental and be able to prepare those documents on your behalf, or vice versa? So you can see how, ultimately it ends up back in the employer's lap just because of the nature of the responsibility.
Okay. And we've got Kim asking, can we get a listing of all of the notices that are required or a link to find them where they are in a user-friendly form? And yes, Kim, we can actually send that to you from Phazon Group, and Task can follow up with you to make sure that that was complete and accurate. And then I've gotten a few questions just about the slides. Yes, they will be sent out at the end. And then finally, Tim asks, is there a way, or is there a company that will outsource all of these responsibilities that that I can't handle on my own? And I think that leads in right into our ERISA Edge talk. That Elliot, you can go ahead and continue with the slides.
Okay, so I wanted to circle back to the question about is there a handy-dandy guide? There is. And Veronica will send that out. Essentially what it is and again, the Department of Labor's website needs some extreme updating, because I know I do this every day, so I know what I'm looking for, and I can tell you it was a challenge to find that instruction manual for employers. So yes, the Department of Labor did put together health and welfare benefit plan responsibility, and then an instruction guide on what the notices are, how to get them out, and so forth. So we will be providing that to you. Task does offer a solution, and our solution is threefold. So we're going to prepare all the documents I mentioned to you, and reviewing them, it would be a wrap document, summary plan description, summary of material modification as it becomes necessary, 5,500 filings, as well as the summary annual report, any of the actual model notices themselves. If you're a self-funded plan or you have an HRA in place and you have PCORI responsibilities, we'll do the form preparation and fee calculation for you as well. I think the most important part of that equation is we're going to extend, and this is unique to Task, is we're going to extend you a hold harmless guarantee. You're going to be able to find a lot of companies that will prepare all those documents for you, but main reason why you're doing all this is not necessarily because you feel that all your employees are going to run home and read these documents in detail. They're probably not. It's because of your liability, right? So we want to make sure that that's part of the equation, that not only are we giving you these documents, but we're extending you a hold harmless guarantee as well. So we give you a $1 million per event that everything that you have is in order and correct. To back that up, we actually have representation at every legislative session in Washington. So as this changes, we change with it real time, and we give you those summaries of interior modification or other documents as they become necessary. Key points, again, that I want you to remember from everything. You must distribute the exchange notice to all new employees. It wasn't just like 2014 and then forget about it. You have to have that ERISA FPD in place. Again, to the previous question, insurance carrier certificate coverage and the documents that they give you are not ERISA compliant. So you do have the extra responsibility of preparing this wrap document on your own. You have 30 days to provide an FPD to an employee upon written request. We saw how Bank of America and those other companies were impacted by failure to deliver that. And you have to do it throughout the year. Okay, so why that's important is, again, in 2012, I believe it was, TASC actually issued 9 separate summaries of material modification to its clients. Not because anything that they were changing on their end, but actually government changes that triggered the need to send out an SMM. And again, I mentioned to you the numbers. The DOL has bolstered their ERISA enforcement efforts by hiring incredibly more. Some of those numbers, how they've turned out, is last year, the Department of Labor, I mentioned that $175 million budget. I did not mention to you that as a result of that $175 million budget, they secured $1.173 billion in fines. So, you know, that's a pretty good return on investment for them, so I don't think that it's going to go away anytime soon. We will support you in the event of that audit, so we're not just going to give you the documents and give you the hold harmless guarantee and disappear. If you are audited, we will walk you through it, so it is a complete and comprehensive solution, and you will be assigned a dedicated rep, so you have a single point of contact for that. So we feel that with respect to ERISA, that's really all you should need in a nutshell. To the point earlier, there was a question regarding some of those notices. I have some of them here for you. I had mentioned them briefly, so you'll get some of them with respect out of the PowerPoint presentation, but we do have the comprehensive list from the Department of Labor as well. These could be subject to the excise tax of $100 per day for every model notice affected. I did mention to you that there's 16 total, so 16 times 100, $1,600 a day if you fail to deliver any of these to the participants. So, you know, the fines themselves are ugly and nobody likes them, but again, if you look at it from the government's perspective, how do you get an employer to do this stuff without that liability on the back end? I think that's the logic there. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about how the excise tax can be avoided. The main thing there is that you're going to deliver the documents that are required. The funny part about this is you'll see on the second bullet point here, IRS Form 8928, there's a form that the IRS created where actually an employer is supposed to self-report their failure. So I don't know of a single employer that would do that, but it's in place. So there's also the PCORI responsibilities. I mentioned those. Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute. It's a educational piece and a fee placed on self-funded plans. It's actually placed on carriers, but because of ERISA's definition, ERISA defines a self-funded plan as you being the actual insurance carrier for the participants. Why do you have that extra responsibility? Just know there is the PCORI along with transitional reinsurance. If you're self-funded, there are some additional points, so make sure when talking with Faison that you discuss that. Questions, comments, suggestions, concerns on our actual solution?
I don't see any coming in through the chat. I'll expect that I'll have a few in my email later, which I'm sure we can address on a one-on-one. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Elliot?
I believe that's it in a nutshell with respect to ERISA responsibilities. I think everyone should have a high-level overview about the responsibilities and some of the key areas where employers fail, and as well as their liability. So, that's what I have. Yep.
Okay, and I just wanted to also mention that ERISA is not the only thing that you guys do. You have ACA, FMLA, COBRA, FSA, HIPAA. There's pretty much every compliance acronym there you guys actually cover. So as far as tasks, you guys are over encompassing on everything HR compliance.
Right. So TASK as a company has 21 different service lines, so we're fully capable of taking all of these administrative burdens and compliance homework off of an employer's shoulders. Couldn't get that out, but yeah. So if any of these other things come up, FMLA, COBRA, you'd like to bundle them or offer some kind of benefit admin platform, we could do that as well.
Okay, and what if somebody wants a proposal? Should they just reach out to us then?
Yes, yeah. If a proposal is necessary, reach out to Faith and we'll work together to determine an appropriate solution.
Okay, great. And then do you have a pricing on the ERISA Edge?
It depends on an employer's size, so it would be specific to the employer. We have 3 different pricing tiers, group sizes of 1 to 49, 50 to 99, and then 100 plus. There are some carve-outs. So model notices, as an example, an employer has the discretion on whether they would like to include that in our service. I highly recommend they do it, but that's just one of the things that they could carve out if they have an alternative way to get a hold of those documents. So, it really would be specific to the employer.
Okay, great. All right, I just wanted to remind everybody that you will be receiving a follow-up from Faison Group. That's us. We do have another webinar coming up in the next month. It's going to be on HRA, HSA, and we look forward to having you back then. And thank you, everybody, for coming today, and thank you, Elliot, for being an excellent presenter.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.